Welcome to Music in Mind Live. I'd like to begin today by sharing a piece just written for me by the Pulitzer Prize-winning composer John Corigliano. This March, when the COVID-19 pandemic brought things to a halt for so many of us, a few hopeful voices were heard, and one belonged to Kitty O'Meara, whose poem, "And the People Stayed Home," traveled around the world on social media with a message of resilience and healing. John set Kitty's text a cappella, without accompaniment, and I was honored that he asked me to premiere it. Here it is.
And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of living and were still and listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced, some met their shadows, and the people began to think differently, and the people healed. And in the absence of people living in ignorant, dangerous, mindless, and heartless ways, the earth began to heal. And when the danger passed and the people joined together again, they grieved their losses and made new choices and dreamed new images and created new ways to live and held the earth firmly as they had been
Thank you, John and Kitty. A great joy of these webinars is having the chance to speak with the most amazing polymaths, people whose talents make me wonder how one could be so brilliant in so many areas. And today's guests are perfect examples. Award-winning neuroscientist and musician Daniel Levitin has authored 4 new New York Times bestsellers, including This Is Your Brain on Music. He is currently founding dean at the prestigious Minerva Schools in San Francisco. He's appeared on most major national news programs and has one of the most popular TED Talks ever. As a musician, he's performed with artists from Mel Torme to Rosanne Cash, worked on albums by Stevie Wonder and Joni Mitchell, and on the films Good Will Hunting and Pulp Fiction. His work has earned him 17 gold and platinum records. Our other guest today, Victor Wooten, is one of Rolling Stone magazine's top 10 bassists of all time. Called the Michael Jordan of the bass and one of the most fearless musicians on the planet, Victor has won every major award, including Bassist of the Year 3 times in Bass Player Magazine's Readers' Poll. He has 5 Grammy Awards. Here's a clip. Incredible. But on top of that, Victor is the author of The Music Lesson, a spiritual search for growth through music, which is currently used in universities, including Berklee College of Music and Stanford. And as his performing and recording career continues, he's a sought-after teacher and speaker. He also operates Wooten Woods, a retreat near Nashville that hosts the Victor Wooten Center for Music and Nature, a program he founded 20 years ago. Before we begin, a reminder to tell us about people and programs that you admire or work you're doing yourself. On my Facebook page, you'll find a post titled, "We Want to Hear From You," where you can share links to great music and health programs in the comments. There's also a link for you to upload a short video or photo about a program or a person doing this work. And if you do, let me know your Facebook address or email so you can be reached. And I encourage you to share links, videos, and photos on your own social media with the hashtag MusicMindLive. And don't forget to submit questions today in the comments section for those of you watching on Facebook. Music in Mind Live has now been seen by more than 170,000 people. I am so gratified by the sense of community and the fantastic information in the comment threads, and I want to thank you. So welcome, Dan Levitin. Your music credentials are first rate. What made you switch to science?
Well, Renee, I guess I never thought of it as a switch, really. I'd been interested in music and science from a young age, and nobody told me I couldn't pursue both. I think the only thing that happened was in the 1990s when the music industry started to self-destruct. I decided I couldn't rely on music to support myself, and so I went back to college and got a degree and started running a laboratory and doing science. But I never stopped playing and never stopped writing music, or
And you
producing, for that matter.
And you followed your own curiosity about the brain, about how we listen to music, everything about how we consume music. Is that correct?
I did. There was a moment I remember being in the studio in San Francisco with Carlos Santana. And as usual, I got goosebumps when I was listening to him. But on this particular day, I wondered where goosebumps come from. And that set me off eventually on a course of study, neuroscience, to better understand what's happening in the body and the brain when we feel so deeply moved by music, as I just was by this piece you sang. And, you know, the title of today's broadcast relates to why music and why now. And I can't think of a better song for you to have presented than that. I was crying with some ineffable combination of joy and sorrow at where we've been is the sorrow, but where we're going was the joy and the hope. And the line about "and heal the earth fully" just really got to me.
Thank you. Thank you. It's funny because being responsible for producing our own work now at home, I became so obsessed with getting it right. I think I had 65 takes of that piece, and I finally just had to let it go. And I haven't had that experience in a while. So tell us a little bit about what's happening in the brain when we're listening to music.
Well, that's a nice segue because I was just listening to some wonderful music, and as often is the case, it's not just one thing that's happening in the brain or one feeling that we have. Music, like life, speeds up and it slows down. And, you know, we rarely feel a pure emotion in our lives, our daily lives. You're rarely just happy. You might be happy with a twinge of sadness or happy with a bit of regret. Like kids go off to college, you have an empty house. Victor just went through this. You're happy for them. You're apprehensive, all of these things. And music can so easily convey mixtures of emotions. And well, maybe we can flip to some slides and walk through a little bit of
Great.
What's happening in the brain. So if we look at a picture of the brain like this one, which I think will be coming on the screen in a moment, we're looking at the left side of the brain, and the old story about how the left and the right side are different. Yeah, they're different, but you can't say that music is in the right and language is in the left, or math is in what, everything's all everywhere. It's also a myth that you're only using 10% of your brain. Both are ridiculous myths. Here, what we're seeing is that music activates pretty much every area of the brain we've so far mapped. There's activation in the front, that's in the left part of the figure, the red part, the frontal lobes, which combine emotional reactions to music along with predictions about what's going to come next. Whether you're a musician or not, whether you're aware of it or not, your brain is a giant prediction device, and it's trying to figure out what's going to come next in a sentence, in a piece of music, as you're walking down the trail in a forest. And that part of the brain synchronizes with the tempo of the music, as does the cerebellum, that red patch at the bottom, that red bundle of fibers. Your neurons synchronize with the tempo. Your brain's trying to figure out what's going to come next. And the composer and the interpreters, musicians, have to strike some balance of giving you just the right amount of what you predicted, reinforcing your predictions so that you feel you're in communication with them, you're on the same page, they're not surprising you all the time, but they have to surprise you once in a while or you get bored. If they don't get the balance just right, it's like, sing-song, Barney the Dinosaur music. You could grow tired of it quickly. If it's too complicated, I think this is why Schoenberg never had a top 100 hit. It's too much for us to grasp. The interesting thing about it, Renee, is that there's no one piece of music that everybody likes. There's no one piece that everybody hates. And that balance of predictability and surprise that you feel is very individual. And it might be different at different times of your life throughout the day. Other regions here, certainly this yellow part is showing that we've got motor cortex activation, which is when you're snapping your fingers or dancing. This is the part of your brain that moves your body. And even if you're not moving, the part of your brain that would move your body is still active, as though it's in a preparatory mode. We've got sensory cortex, that green strip, which is the feedback you get from the bass notes resounding in your body, or the feedback you get as a singer in your vocal cords. Also, there's a lot going on in terms of putting the information together. All that your brain has is the movement of your eardrums wiggling in and out. And it's got to somehow turn that into a perception of music. And it does that by having special purpose modules in the brain that process loudness and melody, loudness, pitch, it binds together the pitch into a melody, duration, which it binds together into rhythm, timbres, all of those things. And then that's sort of what's going on in the brain. And there's a current effort to link neurochemistry and genetics to different aspects of the musical experience. So this is just showing some of the current work that shows there's a particular receptor at the top there, the AVPR1A. Sorry, I didn't name it. It's not a friendly name. But that receptor and its genetic underpinnings contribute to the sense of affiliation, social communication we get from music. And for those of us who are musicians or keen listeners, the idea that music is structured, that it has organization to it. The SLC6A4 transporter is associated with spiritual experiences of music and musical memory. Some people are higher in those qualities than others, and that seems to be owing to this. Oxytocin is associated with bonding. When we listen to music together, we tend to feel bonded with each other and with the musicians. And that leads to empathy.
So I wonder if this is sort of explaining why, for instance, it was recently discovered that a performer has the same brain waves as the audience, that we are in sync together. And the more the audience appreciates the music, the better. It's so fascinating to me.
Yeah, so we published a study in my lab a few years ago that showed when people listen to music, their brain waves actually synchronize. I don't know what that means in terms of whether that promotes compassion. You'd think it might if everybody's literally firing in synchrony. We don't know, but it's something to explore.
Well, it's something I've certainly felt, and I want to bring on Victor Wooten now. Victor, please welcome and thank you so much for joining us. We have some time with you, and I just have to tell you, everybody go to Victor's YouTube videos because you won't believe it. Each one of them has 1 million+ views. It's amazing. And they're totally addictive, so I understand why people go back to them. The virtuosity of your playing, and yet you hardly need to look at your instrument. So what is going on? I need to know this as a performer, in your mind when you're performing.
That's a good question. If it's all going well, I don't really know what's going on, because it's not so much about the performing, no more than it is about each individual word that you say when you're talking. You have an idea that you want to express, and the words, the skill, the talent, if all goes well, happens on its own. And you live in that invisible world that is just the idea or the emotion or whatever. And that's why we practice, so we don't have to think of every minute detail of what's going on. Yeah.
Dan, you said something about Charles Limb, and anybody who's playing, who's improvising in the moment, which is probably most of what you play is improvised, other than having the structure of the harmony. You're shutting off that frontal part of the brain. Can you say something about that, Dan?
Yeah, this is one of the most fantastic findings in modern neuroscience of music. It was our colleague and friend Charles Limb, great jazz musician in his own right at UC San Francisco. Back when he was at Johns Hopkins, he studied the brains of improvisers in a brain scanner, which shows you which parts of the brain are active. And I think a lot of us predicted that if you're improvising jazz, you've got to turn on a lot of brain areas that you wouldn't ordinarily use because it's difficult. The chord changes are difficult. There are key changes. There's a lot of things to think about. But what Charles found so interestingly was that the good improvisers had to shut down parts of the brain. It's not that more areas were active, fewer were. And the particular parts of the brain they had to shut down were the ones that wag the finger at you internally and say, no, that's no good. Or who do you think you are? You can't play that. Or that sounded terrible. You got to turn off the inner critic.
I had a lot of therapy to achieve that, so that's a lot. That's a better way of thinking about it. So I just watched Sophie Huber's fascinating documentary about Blue Notes, the label's history, and Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock made some brilliant statements about jazz living beyond the notes. And it seemed clear to me that playing music together, especially jazz, teaches us how to listen, how to be present and open, and take risks and be vulnerable. And everybody's looking at each other, making eye contact. So, I was saying that when we talked the other day that if everybody played jazz, we'd all get along. And you said, it's because of this listening to each other. And you said this is supported by neuroscience as well.
It is. First, I guess playing jazz isn't different than playing any other kind of music unless you want to do it well. So the thing is, if you're a solo pianist, you don't have to interact with others on the stage. If you're playing written music in an ensemble, you do. You have to adjust your loudness, your timing, and timbre and such based on what others in the ensemble are doing, whether it's a quartet or a 100-piece orchestra. It's true of the New York Philharmonic as it is of the Grateful Dead or Curtis Mayfield's band. But playing jazz well requires that you listen more, that you experience empathy and compassion for the other people on the stage, because without that, it quickly falls apart.
We have to do the same thing. We have to listen to the orchestra very carefully and our colleagues, but the difference is we're actually interpreting a piece of music and trying to be stylistically correct. And we have less sort of freedom in what that interpretation is. I mean, Victor, tell us how you learned to play, because I think your theory of learning music is unbelievably fascinating.
Thank you. I'm the youngest of five boys. So when I was born, actually, I'll say before I was born, my brothers already knew I was the bass player. And it's a true story. It plays like fiction, but it's true. My oldest brother, Reggie, who's only 8 years older than me, he's the one that taught me. He's a guitarist, Roy, a drummer, Rudy, sax, Joseph, keys. So they needed a bass player. And when I was about 2, that was when Reggie, my older brother, who was only 10, really started hands-on teaching me to play the bass. And my brother Joseph was 5 when I was 2. Reggie, who was only 10, was also teaching 5-year-old Joseph to play the keys. And Dan mentioned Curtis Mayfield. When I was 5, the 5 of us brothers were Curtis Mayfield's opening band on his Superfly tour on the West Coast when we were living in California. So
Amazing.
the same way, most of us here, English is our first language. We learn to speak English in a natural way. Our family did it. We were included. No one said, go practice 8 hours a day. Here's what you practice first. We learned through freedom, a natural process. And so I learned to play naturally, the same way we all learn to talk naturally. And so the same way at 5 years old, you can speak clear English. At 5 years old, I was able to speak clear music. Not because I'm a genius, but because the situation and the atmosphere was perfect for it. And so I learned to play that way. So, not that I'm the best musician in the world, no, but I play like me, same way we talk like me. Doesn't make me better or worse. It just makes me me.
What
And
was
so
your
that's the way.
parents' involvement? Because most of us learn through that sort of parental encouragement to practice, for instance.
Um, our parents weren't like that, but they did provide the atmosphere and the physical place for us to do it. Dad always gave the garage over to us boys. That was our music room. Once my parents found out we could actually play, they started booking gigs for us. So they didn't say go practice. I can't ever remember hearing them say that, but they did let us know if we wanted to be good at something, at anything, we needed to do it a lot, practice, and do the things that make you be good. But my mom had a quote that says, what does the world need with just another good musician? She says, we have plenty. She says, what we need are more good people. And so that was first for them. If we're going to spend all this time, effort, money, energy learning to play music, it needs to do more than just make us good on a guitar. It needs to help the world. It needs to make everybody that comes in touch with us better. And so that was their main focus, which in turn became our main focus. And hopefully, in honor of them, we became good at both.
Boy, what a family legacy. That's incredible. Dan, tell us, I've heard you talk about this. I love this. Tell us what 5-year-olds know about music.
Well, yeah, by the time you're 5, even if you're not Victor Wooten, uh, most 5-year-olds have incorporated the rules and structure of the music that they've been surrounded by. It doesn't matter what country you're in, what culture, what scale system. By the time you're 5, you know when a chord is out of key or a note is out of tune or a phrase has somehow been fractured. You know that a piece of music has been stopped at the wrong point. And the same way you know with language that there are nonsense words, which is why Lewis Carroll got so much traction out of Jabberwocky. Uh, you've learned the rules. Language and music are both highly structured in the brain. There are rules. For example, if I say the pizza was too hot to sleep, you know that there's something wrong there. You know that pizzas can't sleep, and 5-year-olds know that.
Mhm.
So what's interesting about the rules, for instance, I know a group at MIT was recently studying whether or not this was cultural or universal. And they could say with certainty after visiting some, I think they were in South America somewhere, where they discovered people who hadn't really been exposed to any other type of music, and they said it's definitely cultural. It's what you learned. It's what you grow up with. So I have to ask one more question for you, Victor, which is that your level of virtuosity, which as we know is incredibly special. What was it in you that pushed you to be even better? And was it competition with your siblings? Was it an innate love of what you were doing, and also the fact that you're giving back to other students and young players now? What drives you?
Um, all of the above, and different levels at different times. Now, as I'm 55, 4 kids. It's more about other people living their dreams than me doing mine. So my focus is more on other people. In the beginning, it was more of a little boy who, a little sibling. We all look up to our bigger sibling, older siblings, whether we admit it or not. Well, I always happily admitted it. I wanted to be like my brothers, and I still do. And they included me. They weren't the kind that beat up on the little brother. They just really and still do hold me up on my shoulders to where I get a lot of the credit. I get to do these shows, but they deserve all of it. They're the
Huh.
ones that made me who I am. I was born into it. It would be like someone coming from another country and saying, "Wow, your English is so good.
Mm.
You're a genius. You're amazing." And you would say, "Well, no. I just was born into it." But I learned a lot from my brothers and my parents, not so much about how to play the instrument, but how to think, how to listen, how to feel. You know, if you can put salt in a dish, and it can either be too salty or it can be just right. It's really not up to the salt. It's up to the people cooking, right? So the people who were cooking my existence, my life, knew how to do it. So I
That's
might get
great.
credit, but I was born to the right people at the right time.
Wow, that's fabulous. I mean, speaking of taste, this is just a taste, really, of the extraordinary gift that you have, and that you have, Dan. And I encourage everybody who's really interested in what you have to say to keep looking further. So when we created something for all of you today, so we'll get to your questions too. There are lots of them piling up here. But Dan composed a song called "Just a Memory," and wrote the music and the lyrics, and we performed it together. Victor's on the track, along with keyboardist Hardy Hempel, and Music in Place supported. It's the Northern California-based philanthropy that's helping musicians to manage this tremendous loss of income they've experienced due to the pandemic. So here's a song from us to you. I got nothing new. Well, we're going to try and post this when we're done. I don't know why we had difficulty with this transmission. I'm so sorry. It is an absolutely beautiful song, and Dan and Victor are fantastic on it. So we will definitely try again. So let's go back to our questions for the moment. We have a question from Justine, who asks if the performer's emotional experience of a phrase is similar to the audience's. Oh, that's a great question. Are their brains on the same track? Dan.
Well, certainly our research showing that when people listen to music, the waves are synchronized suggests it. I did a study with the Boston Symphony Orchestra about 15 years ago, where Keith Lockhart, the conductor, and some select members of the orchestra and select members of the audience all wore physiological measuring equipment. And what we were looking for was that maybe there was something in the heart rate or the sweat on the palms of the conductor, brain activity that would appear there first, and then a few milliseconds or seconds later in the players, and then in the audience. And the technology for that kind of study wasn't very sophisticated, and it's what a scientist would call noisy data, sort of like the noisy video we just tried to watch. So I suspect it's true, but I can't say scientifically it is. Okay. But I can say that when you're having a conversation with somebody, which is what good music is like, even when you're not doing the talking, you feel a connection to them. You feel it in movies, you feel it in visual art. And so I suspect that there's more going on there than we've been able to measure.
Well, one of the great advantages that I have working with the National Institutes of Health is that I know that they want the data to be on a higher level, and they want to be helpful in that because they really think there's something there in terms of music and science. So it'll be very exciting to see, also as technology improves, right, that we'll get better outcomes for some of these studies.
For those of you who don't know, Renée has been a great champion working with the director of the National Institutes of Health, Francis Collins, who himself is a musician, and he's going to be on this Zoomcast sometime soon.
Next week, exactly.
And
so,
Renée, I'm sorry to butt in. If I could just say one thing from a maybe a poor man's version of the same thing is having traveled the world a lot. I do know that when we go to see music, we've made an unconscious agreement with the rest of the audience before we even get there. We've all agreed that we're there kind of to give ourselves over to whatever the performer offers us. And because of that previous agreement, we've let go of other disagreements.
Hmm.
So, in other words, when I'm standing next to you watching whoever perform, I don't care of the color of your skin. I'm not sitting there thinking about who Dan voted for or who this person prays to. We've agreed upon this. And many times we focus on our disagreements, but music makes us focus on what we've agreed upon, even when the disagreement, I'm sorry, even when the agreement is unconscious. But like looking at the same bouquet of flowers, we all see it from a different view. So we can describe it and we'll know that we're talking about the same thing, but we each have a different view. So, yes, we sync up, but there's still our individuality differences that come into it.
See,
Music
I
is
love that. I've noticed that as I've toured the world, and I've been afraid to go to some places sometimes because of whatever's happening politically, and I'm never treated any differently. I'm treated as a welcome artist, and that's why we're ambassadors for the places that we live in a very positive way. That's a great point. So Jessica from Frisco, Texas asks, have there been studies on musicians with neurological disorders and how neurological damage may affect their ability to make music in terms of mobile skills or cognitive processing?
Yeah, there have been. Some are naturalistic studies, some are more laboratory based. The all of my former mentor Oliver Sacks wrote about a man who was struck by lightning, literally struck by lightning, and that caused a neurological disorder that made him want to compose music. He had never done that before, but he suddenly started composing all the time. Glenn Campbell famously had a neurological disorder, Alzheimer's disease, and he toured with it. And although he didn't know what year it was or even what decade it was during the last couple of years of his life, the brain scans, which I've seen, show that half his brain was offline. He was still the best guitarist on the planet, in my mind. The other interesting thing we see, Joni Mitchell had polio as a child, which left her neurologically unable to use more than two fingers on her left hand. And
I never
rather
knew
than
that.
yeah, so rather than be daunted by that, she just invented new tunings that allowed her to play the guitar with two fingers.
Well, I love those tunings. I learned them when I was in college. So Luis from Brazil asks Dan, but this is a question for you too, Victor, if either of you have experience using music or teaching music to children who are blind.
yes. Yeah. Uh, I'm fascinated with blind musicians to the point where we do a lot of blindfolded exercises every day at the camps we use. The camps that we do, we use, shutting down the eyes to bring out other things. But if you think about it, I don't know that a study's been done on it, but if you notice, you won't meet, you won't ever meet a good blind musician. You'll only meet great blind musicians. Every one of them. There's something about when a person shuts or when life shuts down one facility in your body. If you'll do it, you'll raise the other aspects of it. And we see it all the time. I've seen people with no arms play and sing with their feet.
Wow.
I have a really good friend, autistic friend, in Portland, Oregon, and he said whenever the doctors told him what he wouldn't be able to do in life, he went out and learned to do it. And all the things they told him he couldn't do, he just put his mind to it. So, but yes, that's a long way to say yes. I've worked with a lot of blind musicians, and
We,
there's something that they have that I'm always trying to grasp.
there have been a couple of actually who have participated in our sound health conferences actually at the Kennedy Center, and they're really incredible musicians. And Charles Lim has shown, actually in one in particular, how the brain completely lights up, and even the visual cortex lights up, which tells you the plasticity of the brain is so incredible and enables us, as you said, to use all of the other senses wisely. One last question. Justine asked Dan, do we know the neurological reason that some people can carry a tune and some can't?
Yeah, so
They're all great questions.
so-called tone deafness, in most cases, there are two kinds. There's tone deafness where you can't carry a tune, and there's tune deafness. Tune deafness is where you don't know what the song is. Ulysses S. Grant was tune deaf. He used to say, I know only two songs. One of them is Yankee Doodle and the other isn't.
The other isn't. That's great.
So that's a rarer affliction, and that has to do with an inability to hold in memory complex auditory structures that are non-speech. Grant was a great writer and great with speech. In the case of tone deafness, where you can't carry a tune, in most cases it's not neurological. Maybe 5% of the population consider themselves tone deaf, but it's a lot of different reasons. They may not have developed good control over their vocal cords, and that's why they can't carry a tune, but they could practice, they could take lessons, and they could fix it. Some people just don't have a good mental representation of pitches, but that can be learned. So again, comes back to culture and training. Almost every case of tone deafness we've seen, other than something that actually, like a stroke or something that wipes out a part of the brain during your adulthood, nobody's really born that way. And then, of course, if you have brain damage and you lose the ability to structure information, keep track of pitch, control your vocal cords, then you have what we call acquired amusia.
I love that. I learned exactly what you said, though, and when I studied music education, which is that everybody could learn how to sing if they had the right tools. And I do have one more question, Victor, for you from Trevor. Any advice for music teachers being able to enter the classroom as fellow artists rather than with such a power gap that's often found in classrooms?
Meaning a power gap between the student
And the teacher, yeah.
Yeah, teach it. Treat it like you're teaching your kid how to talk. Right? We don't tell our babies, you're not speaking English yet, so I can't talk to you. Go practice. We also don't make our babies learn English from other babies. The babies learn from professionals in English, right? And we never treat our children like a baby. To the point when they're not speaking English, we learn their way. Your mom knew every word, every sound, every body motion that you made as a baby. We didn't wait until you learned our way. So as a music teacher, we have to learn the students' gifts rather than waiting and forcing them to learn ours.
That's beautiful.
We start from what their gifts are and we help enhance them because you're born musical. The first sound you make is very musical.
Okay, I want to see you teach. I really want to see you teach. That's beautiful. So we're out of time now. I want to thank both of you, our extraordinary guests, Dan Levitin and Victor Wooten. Please join us again next Tuesday at 5 p.m. via my Facebook page, Renée Fleming Music, or the Kennedy Center YouTube channel. Episodes will be available to view later, though, if you missed the live webinar. And to stay in the loop, please sign up for the newsletter at my Facebook page or my website, reneefleming.com. Next Tuesday, I will welcome the leaders of two of our nation's greatest institutions, Dr. Francis Collins, Director of the U.S. National Institutes of Health, the largest public funder of biomedical research in the world, and Deborah Rutter, President of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, our National Performing Arts Center. I'm proud to say that they are both colleagues in the Sound Health Initiative, and I can't imagine better thought leaders to discuss our topic, leadership and collaboration in music, the arts, and science. And hopefully Dr. Francis Collins can tell us a little bit about a coming vaccine. Thank you very, very much. See you next week. And please tune in and come back to the site so you can hear this beautiful song that Dan wrote that's put together so fabulously. Definitely come back and give it a listen. Thank you.